Well, hey there, freaks. Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty here to introduce this week's sponsor before we get on to the incredible interview with Alex Liegl. I think you freaks are really going to enjoy it. But first, you already know the Cash App is the #1 finance app in the App Store. What you freaks already know if you've been listening to this podcast for a while is that you can also put the Cash App in your wallet with the Cash Card. If you're relatively new to this podcast, you're welcome for telling you about this fact. I've been a very happy Cash Card user for the last several months, and this is because it's the only debit card that offers instant rewards and comes packed with premium features not even credit cards can offer. All right, these Boost program that they have, $1 off coffee every day. I don't think you should be buying coffee every day. All right, let's get frugal here. We should be making coffee at home, but hey, you may not have time. You may not have the time to make coffee, and if you don't, I highly recommend getting the Cash Card and initiating the $1 off coffee boost just to save some money every day. On top of this boost, there's 10% off Whole Foods, Chipotle, Shake Shack, Domino's. They're adding more retailers every week. It's insanity, freaks. The Cash Card puts you in control of your money with extra in-app safety features that let you pause your card with a touch. You fall in love with the bar. You become swooned and swept off your feet by a guy or girl at the bar, and you're so enthralled with this person that you forget your wallet at the bar. Hey, you're in the Uber on the way back to drinks after the first bar. You could toggle it off, say, hey, I don't want anybody to use my Cash Card right now. This is something you do on the Cash Card that you can't really do with a lot of other products. So unlike a credit card, there are no fees ever, and the credit check isn't required to get one. We are not using the other apps anymore. Don't even know their names. So visit the App Store, Google Play, to download the Cash App now and get your fresh Cash Card today. Your free Cash Card. It is fresh as well. You can customize it. Okay. Hope you freaks enjoy this episode with Alex. I know I did.
Tales from the Crypt.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent here on a Tuesday night back in the studio at dig.com offices. It's been a while since I've been in here. Been locked up in my studio. My wife kicked us out of there, though. I'm really excited for tonight's conversation. We're going to go beyond Bitcoin and get into some privacy coins. I want to introduce you freaks to Alex Liegl.
How's it going?
Welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Appreciate you for coming all the way to Brooklyn.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
And thanks for being so patient. You freaks don't know this, but it just took me about 25 minutes to get the SD card cleared and into the mic. But here we are. Alex, you're in town. You've stopped by. Before we dive into what you've been working on most recently, for you freaks that don't know, Alex, managing partner?
Yeah, managing partner. Or better, founder, CEO, I guess.
Yeah, founder, CEO at Layer1 Capital, which is based in San Fran. Recently raised fund with Peter Thiel was involved, as well as
Jeff Tarrant, a couple great angels as well.
Yeah.
Really pumped about our investors.
Yeah, and you guys are a cryptocurrency investment company, activist cryptocurrency investment company. Excuse me. You've done hedge funds and tech firms in the past.
Yep.
You're Grin bull.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that too.
But how the hell did you get into all this?
That's a good question. So to backtrack, grew up in Munich, Germany. Shout out to that. Anybody who's listening who might be German. Hallo, wie geht's? Servus. And moved to California for university, went to Stanford. There I studied applied math and philosophy, and during my time there, I actually started a quant fund called Bessel Capital, which traded index volatility derivatives, so options, futures, ETFs, ETNs. Basically got my first foot in the door in the space in terms of what does it mean to manage a daily P&L, what does it mean to be involved in traditional asset markets, what does it mean to deal with LPs. We're institutionally funded. After that, I worked at Stanford Management Company, the Stanford Endowment Fund. $25 billion was actually the first undergrad they ever had. And
oh yeah.
Yeah, after that, it seems like they started a great program, really pumped about that. I think that's really important for an endowment fund who effectively, has a mandate of improving the financial well-being of the school while also making sensible investments to integrate current and former students as fast as possible. That's really important. After that, I went more towards the tech angle, actually, shifting my focus from finance to technology. Started a company called Apex Labs. Shout out to my former teammates. Effectively, that was a company that wanted to become a palantir for tax agencies, which is actually the diametric opposite of what my focus is nowadays.
You were trying to seize money, now you're working on unseizable money.
Yeah, basically, cathartic event, going from the dark side to the good side, from the good guys to from the bad guys to the good guys. Working with tax agencies, running artificial intelligence technology in order to structure, unify their data, and then effectively allow them to better understand how tax fraud occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the meantime, I think I got my first real solid understanding of Bitcoin in 2013. Ran a small my electricity arbitrage play in Stanford, because electricity is free in your student dorm. So, very, very small mining up, just making a couple Bitcoins.
Was it Bitcoin or?
It was only Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. Sorry. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, you can curse there.
All right. Good. Reflecting back on sort of my path, which has always been oscillating between finance and tech, and then realizing that cryptocurrencies lie at precisely that intersection, right? Exactly where financial markets meet technology markets. And retrospectively, my background, for better or for worse, was always at that intersection. So I came to the realization that it was just the ideal fit for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really where I see myself going forward in the future, and maybe forever. Just because there is this whole industry that's just developing and emerging, and it's going to develop in ways that we can't even predict or foresee. And it's incredibly exciting that all of a sudden you find something that you really resonate with on a very deep level, on an intellectual level, philosophical level, psychological level.
Yeah, so you said philosophical level. You studied philosophy in college.
I did.
Do you think that helped lead you to Bitcoin, or?
I actually think it might have been more important than studying math. I think specifically in thinking or trying to think rigorously and trying to really come from first principles in deducing how to put all the different pieces together, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're dealing with something that nobody really knows what they're doing. Everybody's really trying to understand and emulate others and the system and the industry. And right, there's no valuation framework that exists. There's no sort of established rules or infrastructure. Everybody's engaging in this massive multiplayer game in real time, and people are taking directional bets, and we'll see how that works out. I think there's better bets you can take. There's worse bets you can take.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is you really have to create a coherent framework personally in order to really systematize all of the stuff that's going on. And for that reason, I think philosophy really helped me, because the main, sort of objective of philosophy is just to think critically and rigorously about things.
Right.
So basically what you want to do is list a couple of premises, whatever your argument rests upon, and then draw a reasonable conclusion, and that's it. And then you can just repeat and rinse and repeat and do the same playbook all over again. And all that really matters is just that you can come to the core truth of something, and then everything else falls into place.
Yeah. You're providing a perfect segue for me. Your paper that you wrote with Hasu, where you basically approached Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies from first principles perspective,
Yep.
and deduced that the only token worth investing in by the end of the paper we come to find is a store value token that's censorship resistant and
Yep.
Is probably enabling legal or frowned upon activities.
Yeah, and the whole idea that sort of inspired this essay or this paper was trying to understand how economic value accrual is actually justified, right? These frameworks are well established for traditional asset classes. For stocks, you have discounted cash flow statements. For credit, you have others. For currencies, you have, sort of fiat currencies, you have some other forms. All of a sudden, you're tasked with understanding and creating a framework for something entirely novel. And in the meantime, it's entirely in flux, right? All of the parameters are changing. Nobody really knows what the end game is going to be. So the objective was to create this valuation framework, at least as a guiding principle towards better understanding how can I rigorously defend value accrual for a specific coin. And the conclusion was quite simple, which is for any coin, the only thing that really matters is the removal of an outstanding supply in terms of improving the price. And that's only possible if it functions as a competitively superior store of value. And then you're additionally faced just with the overall, I guess, end game that all of these currencies abstract away any of the fragmentation that is produced in fiat currencies. And with that, you're left with a winner takes most or winner takes all market. And that is really going to be, in my opinion, the sort of the correct way of thinking about how value can even flow and accrue in this industry.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to come to this conclusion, do you think?
All my life. No, but seriously, it was definitely an iterative process.
Yeah.
Sort of that, takes perhaps even years to manifest itself and really understanding the material at an increasing level of depth. Specifically also just because I always had crypto in the back of my mind, but I never, professionally engaged within it in the sense of having a business and, actually making investment management decisions. And then so over the summertime, I started thinking about how can I, also just create value for the space, if that's crypto Twitter, if that's Telegrams or whatnot, the people that I talk with and my friends. There's a lot of discussions going on, but I felt what was missing was just a very rigorous, clear understanding of what are the premises that you should assume from first principles, and then what is the actual conclusion that you can logically draw.
Yeah, and I think it's been a good product of this bear market, as a lot of people in particular are sort of consolidating the pitch, I would say. I actually wrote about it today in the pen. Basically sharpening the pitch and making it so that it's easier to understand, more direct to the point. And it's funny, like you said, like crypto Twitter, Telegram, many people are contributing from different areas, like Dan Held's series, 4-part series
that was awesome.
On Bitcoin species and Bitcoin season and all of that. Like what you and Hasu wrote, what Nick Carter's been writing,
or Iterative Capital.
Iterative Capital, their tome that they wrote,
Behemoth.
104-page white paper. It was more of like a manifesto or something like that. It was really good, but that the bear market has allowed people to sort of, all right, sit back and think, why are we in this? And to prepare for the next bull market, how are we going to, because we are charged with marketing this, I would guess. Like, I don't even know how you would say it, because there's no central authority saying here's how we market it. It's all people bouncing ideas off each other and destroying FUD, like deflationary currencies, the mining FUD, distribution FUD, whatever it may be. It seems like people are sort of going down the list of the tropes that mainstream media and other naysayers like to throw at Bitcoin and handily trying to destroy FUD piece by piece, which has been good to see. So hopefully during the next bull run, there will be more wise investment. Do you see it getting as crazy as it did last year?
I do think, sort of the groundwork is being set for it to be a more mature bull market going forward, right? You have sort of the Fidelity announcements, you have like Bakkt, you have, the Goldman Sachs of the world getting established, you have really sort of key infrastructure players getting involved, thinking very smartly about how to stratify this entire industry. And I would say that the last one was basically it was very retail focused, and for that reason also less mature or less well, I guess structured. And it's interesting because you definitely just cannot look towards past cycles and try and project it on towards future ones. I think the task is really better understanding what is the fundament being laid currently, and it's heavily skewed towards institutionals, and that's also how it's going to play out, which is, right, they're going to run a much tighter ship, well, significantly better organized, and for that reason probably also returns, how they're distributed over multiple assets, are going to be way more concentrated because of better capital allocations, high leverage amongst the players. Generally also, hopefully what you were addressing, right? Better valuation frameworks, better
Right.
ways that people are able to think about where value even has a chance of accruing in the first place.
Yeah, and probably some proper due diligence will enter the space as well. It won't just be Bitcoin talk forum, people scouring and believing anonymous devs and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why, like, from working at a fund, I was an analyst as well, and you realize that the due diligence that goes into the back end, especially if you're like a fund to fund or something like that, the compliance that you need to follow is extraneous.
Yeah.
Extraneous, is that the right word? I don't know. Could be.
You really have to be pedantic, I guess,
Right?
for
Yeah.
due diligence. It's not going to be the Wild West any longer,
No.
which is a good thing. Like, I feel like a lot of people are disappointed that perhaps, some of that, I guess, ethos will be lost going forward. But from a, 30,000 foot perspective, it's probably what's necessary just to achieve the next step.
Yeah. So speaking of the next step, what do you think it is? Do you think what do you think pushes Bitcoin to the fore? Is it a geopolitical situation, a global financial crisis? It seems like the trade war that we are enacting on China is beginning. I mean, with a combination of other things that China has bestowed upon itself, is beginning to show cracks in China's economy in particular.
Yeah.
Growth's beginning to slow there. There's a lot of weird things happening around the world, Latin America, Turkey, Iran, wherever it may be, a lot of places where Bitcoin can help out. Is it ready for that stage, do you think?
I think it's like very easy to romanticize Bitcoin
Right.
into being this savior against all corrupt governments of the world, and sort of being the instant and final remedy against all these problems. I don't think it's ready yet. I think
I would
this
agree.
whole institutional intermediary step is imperative for it
Mhm.
to be so in future. I can put my finger in the air and come up with a number of how many years I think in the future it could have a chance of competing against, what is effectively sort of the final bosses, right? If that's the US or China or whatnot, that's going to be 10 or 20 years, somewhere in that time frame.
Yeah.
I think for the next step, if a financial crisis were to occur, Bitcoin is still a risk-on asset, absolutely. I think
Mhm.
it's still highly speculative. I think once there is a solvency risk issue with, prominent central bank, I think then something like Bitcoin could be interesting. However, it seems like a, 20 sigma event
Yeah.
in terms of probability that I just cannot fathom that it would actually be the case in future. I think if there's going to be an equity downturn, Bitcoin is likely going to follow, just because it's, basically leveraged risk exposure for most of these managers.
Yeah. I was speaking with Jack Mallers last week, and we were just laughing at like how Bush League, Bitcoin, and altcoin exchanges are
Yep.
compared to like your
Crazy.
run-of-the-mill like Flash Boys exchanges, where the traders will get as close to the exchange as possible, so their fiber optic cords with like laser lights can get their trades in as quickly as possible. And crypto exchanges are using like Node.js to send like, trades via API calls and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I still had, these are all exceptionally smart people, but basically them on their laptop at home running StatR, models in which they just arbitraged on different crypto exchanges and made a lot of money, which just alone that actually is still an opportunity for these guys is the prime example and even proof that we're just a far way away from it being on the same level as traditional asset classes.
Yeah, no, I would agree. But that's a tough thing especially for people that are like really into big. Like a lot of people want it to happen really quick, and that's one thing I've been pontificating upon here, and in the bent in particular the last couple months is we're not going to get everything out of the box at once. It's people who expect this technology, and like you said, it's more about like first principles, and I would argue like this is more of a psychological movement at the end of the day because we're changing money, so you have to like change minds at the end of the day, and this is like changing the psychology of the masses. It's going to take a while. So we're 10 years past the white paper. Do you think you became enthralled around 2013? Are we ahead or behind where you probably thought we would be back then?
Well, assuming I'm just turned 26, 5 years ago I was 21, so probably a lot more naive about my outlook. I thought I would personally be able to conquer the world back then, and more so even probably Bitcoin.
Right.
So I do think my outlook has matured a lot since.
No, it's funny how that happens. I was sure as we're around the same time as I was an analyst, I was sure the economies of the world and the currencies were gonna melt down within the next like 3 years, and now it's like, all right, you little asshole, you were jumping the gun a little bit there. Yeah,
I thought. Yeah, I mean, I was still talking about bush leagues, man. Like back in the day when I was trying to sort of play around with sort of my quant fund and then directional investing, sort of more long term, and then coming to the conclusion that this is all shit's about to hit the wall, hit the fan. Also, me and English idioms sometimes I just screw them up.
That was a good one.
Being German, back then I thought, wow, like all of a sudden you have a type of money which effectively cannot be influenced by a single sovereign or entity anywhere. Right. And for me, it also had a little bit of like a personal background story. Like my grandfather lived in Bohemia during the Second World War.
Oh, damn.
Had to flee when he was 16. Basically was out of school and, away from his family for 2 or 3 years. And then with the end of the war was effectively left with nothing. Right. Mm-hmm. And that was purely a function of something akin to Bitcoin not being there for him. All of a sudden, he had to lose his financial wealth, his assets, his family's assets, and so forth. He was left having to complete high school the last 2 years with 19. His path was, one of extraordinary success thereafter, but I spent a lot of time after coming across Bitcoin reflecting on how would life have been different for him, mm-hmm. given the opportunity that it presents to people currently, right? Which is, a way of storing asset value or wealth in a way that cannot be influenced by any form of government or entity. You can securely store it from a technological perspective. It's portable, it's divisible. You can go with it across borders. You can even save it in your brain if you just memorize the private keys, right? That's mm-hmm. absolutely insane to run a brain wallet, right?
Going around naked with millions of dollars.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Basically, got money on my mind.
Right?
Literally.
Literally.
Right? Literally.
Oh, dude. I've been listening to a lot of Kanye. Life of Pablo. The one line, I forget what song it is. But he's like, I got treasures in my mind.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
But I'm such a Bitcoin fucking nerd. I think of Trezor, Trezor. I got treasures in my mind.
Man, my phone autocorrects all the Bitcoin lingo nowadays. All of a sudden, it's real bad. I always gotta backpedal, and it's like, oh no, that's not what I meant. Actually, decentralized is not what I meant. I was talking about, I don't know, distilling or I don't know, whatever.
That was a decent football play. I swear, I'm watching.
Decent.
But no, it's funny. It's and that's actually one thing I read about today in an article. Is like, with everything going on in the world, and like you just described your grandfather's story, and what would have happened if it was with Bitcoin was available back then. Like it is available now, which like begs the question: like, do you think our generation, because it is really, I would argue, our generation leading this charge in particular, Do you think we're going to take advantage of it? Do you think this is sort of a once in a very long while opportunity to change the world for?
I hope so. I do think, though, the actual action of taking advantage of it is, going to take some time.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, I guess, actions are interpreted as something that happens very quickly, right? In the sense of like a physical action. And then, I guess, expanding that or multiplying that to however many people conduct that action. But I think embracing and emulating a Bitcoin ethos is as much of an action of taking advantage of, the optionality that it provides, as if I actually store wealth in Bitcoin and am able to evade government sanctions or something like that going forward. The latter being, perhaps not as commonplace as it could or should be. But on the other hand, circling back to the whole infrastructure development, it's purely a function of that, right? I think, easily in Africa, or, if you want to say like the sort of reductio ad absurdum would be, why doesn't Zimbabwe just go all Bitcoin? Because they don't have any infrastructure yet, right? And then I guess you're faced sort of with adverse selection, which is the people that are sort of most likely to emulate the mindset are the ones that live in the U.S. or live in Europe. They don't need to worry right now about being debased by their government to a level that is, happening in Zimbabwe or in Venezuela or whatnot. So, basically putting into the context of my grandfather and projecting it onto 2018, what's the country closest to Eastern Europe nowadays, as it was in the Second World War? And then if you, I guess, go to the extreme and put it equal to Zimbabwe or Venezuela, where clearly the infrastructure doesn't yet exist to an extent where the people are truly able to take advantage of it. Perhaps he might not have been able to take advantage of Bitcoin if it existed then, but I think just because there's been a proliferation of wealth in especially in the Bitcoin community of early adopters, and because of the Bitcoin ethos, people are very altruistic in their ambitions, that they're laying the groundwork so that hopefully in the near future, these types of people in Venezuela or whatnot do have the opportunity to take advantage of it. And from a capital allocation perspective, they will very likely will have the option to do so, hopefully in the next 5 years.
Yeah, and that's what I wrote down while you were talking. There was optionality, and the option wasn't there before. So is it? Do you think it? Like this is what I believe. I believe it's just like a matter of time. But like this optionality didn't exist 10 years ago, and there really wasn't any other option other than maybe gold, if you wanted to hedge personally, but you weren't probably ever going to be able to spend it anywhere, unless you're doing like a peer-to-peer OTC trade or something like that. The optionality that exists now, like, to me, it's like obvious, right? This is a better option. It's just like it's going to be a matter of time before people realize that. And what I think we're at a point right now is where people don't realize there is optionality, and there are other options, and that's like the part of the cycle that we're in, is we're trying to, like we were talking about earlier, make everybody aware of the optionality.
Yeah. That's why I love bear markets, because all of a sudden people are less focused with the price and marketing and making the money, and they can focus on what truly matters. Critically, education is one of the core pillars of that, right? And sort of people being aware of the optionality, and then moreover having the ability to take advantage of it, is purely a function of education and being aware of what they have. And like you said, we're going through this checklist, this bucket list of what are the things that we want to crank out in terms of maturing this industry, increasing the audience, and so forth. And of course it's easy to criticize the choices people make in terms of what their priorities are or not, but if you really put it into the context of the last 10 years, the graph has really been going upwards and to the right. Right. And I think that's incredible.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in the hardest price movement for Bitcoin was from $0 to $1. Like, as soon as that happened, started a cascading effect that'll be inevitable over a long period of time. But yeah, like it has gone up and to the right. Like people shitting on Bitcoin for the year it's had. Like it was only above where it is now for like 40 days, 50 days, maybe that or probably. Yeah, because we dipped down. We went up to like 11K, then we dipped down back to like 8. Yeah, so we were probably actually above like 60 to 65 days. We were above where we are now. Yeah. I'm totally making this number up, but it's somewhere around there.
I think the ballpark is generally right.
In the long scheme of things, out of 10 years, that's such a minuscule percentage of the total lifespan. But
and then even the numbers of like what people, like how many people own Bitcoin, you know, it's not even just the fact that people actually decided to exchange, you know, other money they worked extremely hard for their entire life and said, hey, I'm going to put it into this asset that maybe I don't even fully understand. I mean, that's incredible. We're talking of like tens of millions of Bitcoin owners at this point. You know, like I was able to tell my mom what Bitcoin is, and she's fully aware, and she owns some even right now, right? And she's really, you know, bullish on it.
Alex, I'm letting you into my personal life here. You can see a picture of me and my wife here. Look at what our friend texted us this morning.
I love it.
First $50
let's go
Bitcoin purchase on Cash App. HODL.
I love it.
This is a 20 or a 30-year-old woman who's buying Bitcoin, $50 every paycheck now.
That's awesome.
Realizes it's the bear market. Not the most technically capable woman I know, but she's in.
That's fantastic.
Right? But that's like where I've been getting a lot of my friends who are like always like at arm's length around Bitcoin, like, it's interesting. I should probably learn about it at some point. And more recently, more people have been reaching out like, hey, I'm thinking about this more seriously now. And that's like Murad's been on this podcast and saying we're going to be in a 2-year bear market. And I'm just like, it's like so hard to call. Yeah. I think people are becoming more comfortable with it. It's becoming more normalized in pop culture as well. Like I was taking the train last week. It's the third time you freaks are going to hear the story on this podcast. But I don't think Alex has heard it. Last week, Halloween, trick-or-treating in Hoboken, come back to take the train back to Brooklyn. Waiting on the platform, and they have like a TV with like NBC, which is one of the biggest corporations in the world. They have like the news items of the day, and it was 10-year anniversary of the white paper, and it was like one of the 3 news items. So to think that was going to happen like 2013, like that would never happen. Like back then, but now it's becoming more and more normal. It's getting dropped in rap songs, getting referenced in movies. And,
the meme is spreading,
right,
and becoming established. It's probably not even a meme any longer. It's just a fact of life currently,
right? Blocks are being produced every 10 minutes. Nobody's stopping it.
Yeah, and you know, for people, I think it was still significantly more a toy or something surreal or even alien, while the price was so incredibly volatile and high, right? Because that for them signaled irrationality and signaled gambling and signaled, you know, basically casino. Now you have something which still exists and is blossoming from an infrastructure perspective, despite, right? I mean, Bitcoin is down 65% from the all-time high, roughly like that. And even then, people are getting the headlines left and right every single day of what awesome stuff is being developed. And I think once they start to reconcile their previous notions of Bitcoin as something that is mainly for gambling with all the real development from a rational perspective that you can understand as such, they're going to start embracing it, even if just them accepting it as something that has a right to exist and something that justifies a value proposition. Not even, you know, if they own it or buy it or whatnot, but it's actually a thing that has its place in the world, and it's a fact of life that Bitcoin is, right? It's not Bitcoin is something, it's just Bitcoin is.
Bitcoin is, and that is enough. Our friend Beautyon likes to expound that message in the world.
Yeah, I didn't know he said that, but that's actually really nice.
Right? Bitcoin is, and that is enough. Yeah. But the right to exist, I'm happy you said that. Like, is like, and that's another ongoing question I typically have with other Bitcoiners. Like, we imagine there will be a point where governments, especially governments that are threatened by Bitcoin, attack the network. But do you think there will ever be, like, is there a threshold where, as a society, we can say, hey, this has a right to exist and we have a human right to utilize this technology? Have we passed it? If not, is it close? Or maybe does it not exist?
That's a tough one. I think that's as much a function of, how current government agencies are thinking about Bitcoin as is how much power do the people have of actually influencing governmental decisions.
Okay.
I think I can only speak for the former, less so of the latter, just because, frankly, I'm not that knowledgeable on the U.S. sort of government system, politics, etc. Rather, thinking
you're lucky.
I'm also not that educated on the German one.
Germany had a big announcement. Merkel stepping down from the Christian Democratic Party.
Ruffled
right?
some feathers recently. Yeah. But I mean, talking about Europe in terms of late adopters, they're still, I go back home and it's significantly less well established than in the U.S. I think on every previous technological cycle, if that's cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, or before that, mobile apps, or before that AI, or just the internet in and of itself, the U.S. is predominantly the leader, and Europe definitely has a multi-year lag. But speaking of sort of how does Bitcoin have a right to exist in terms of meeting a final boss and then even standing a chance of survival? On one hand, I want to say it has sufficiently permeated society in a way that just the notion of Bitcoin will exist forever, and that the ethos that is sparked of something demarcating money from state, right? All of a sudden you can conceptualize it has completely turned the notion of money on its head, right? Before
I wouldn't even say it turned the notion of money on its head. It has incepted the idea of money in people's head. It has people thinking about money, whereas they never did think about money. They were just born into the system and they just started running. They were like, "Oh, that's money. It works. This is money. What are you talking about? It just works." Yeah,
I mean, that's a great point.
Right.
Also sort of, I guess I try to sort of read a lot of economic and technological history, and you always romanticize about what would have been like to be around for the time of the steam revolution or manufacturing revolution, electricity revolution, and so forth. And all of these revolutions completely disrupted things that we just took for granted as a fact of life, right? And now all of a sudden we're entering an age where the concept of money as we were used to it for the past, let's say like the 100 years, however many generations suffice in order to span that time horizon, is completely turned on its head in the sense of what is truly money. And that's why crypto is like drawing everybody in from all different types of backgrounds, right? Because money touches everything in our life.
Right.
And, if that's computer science, politics, economics, finance, arts, music, and so forth, money, money makes the world go around, right? And for that reason, cryptocurrencies are so incredibly fascinating because they hold something for everybody. And the notion of money applies to everybody. So in this case, we actually now have the opportunity to participate in a technological revolution, which is completely changing our understanding of what money is, and then also how we will apply it going forward in future.
Right. You made me think of an incredible Urban Artisan tweet that came out over the weekend, which was Bitcoin is a Gordian knot of interlocking incentives.
Yep. That's a great one.
It just as soon as it went from $0 to $1, as soon as value was imbued on the network in some way, like boom, started off the cascading effect of, all right, miners can see, okay, there's a little value there. Maybe I'll spend some electricity to start mining. And you know what? Hey, I'm going to liquidate it, create markets, and slowly but surely over time, we're here and we're at a point where I would argue Bitcoin has bootstrapped itself and its incentive network to a point where we might be locked into this motherfucker forever.
Yeah, it might be, in escape velocity already.
Right, exactly. And we just don't realize it. And that's... No, there was especially in the bear market, is also making people like fight with each other. So like Bitcoin maximalists going after each other, altcoiners, Bitcoiners snapping at each other's feet, big debate in side Telegram channel of like if altcoins are healthy for the overall ecosystem, just from a competition standpoint. I think everybody would agree that, or not everybody would agree. I would agree that I think alts drive a healthy amount of competition. I do not agree with all of them, but something like Litecoin proving that Segwit could work and basically proving the way is okay. What Monero just hard forked to put in bulletproofs.
I don't buy the argument that decentralization is equal to altcoins existing.
No,
I don't think that's the case. I don't think the ecosystem is decentralized, as I think was like a big debate on Twitter a couple weeks ago, or whatever. Of, you know, if the ecosystem really wants to be decentralized, then altcoins need to exist. I think from a sort of crypto Darwinian perspective, it's even not only important but a requirement, a necessity for altcoins to exist, to just have, you know, constant pressure on top of Bitcoin and let's call them like premium altcoins, in order for, you know, like inertia is, you know, the enemy of everyone, right? And anything. So as long as altcoins exist, they will create competitive pressure towards Bitcoin in a way that will lead to an improvement of Bitcoin on whatever dimension that may be. So I think just alone for that reason, and that reason has so many, you know, multifaceted consequences, altcoins should exist. I do think that inertia would be probably can be reduced to the main reason of what could kill Bitcoin going forward. If you imagine all altcoins would just go away tomorrow, I think that would be terrible for Bitcoin.
Just have all eyes on it. The eye of Sauron solely locked on it at all times. So that's like altcoins also provide like some cover for Bitcoin as it confuses regulators and everybody else trying to figure out what's legitimate and what's not. It's like so it's safety by confusion maybe, which could work out in the long run. I mean, Bitcoin has proven like through all these cycles, boom and bust cycles, probably been 4 or 5 up to this point, Bitcoin has remained number one, while the top 10 altcoins have cycled pretty consistently.
I also think from a regulation perspective, right? Like, you know, short-term gratification is the key objective of politicians. So if they're faced with Bitcoin versus low-hanging fruit of who they can go after, then, you know, probably altcoins, to your point, can actually, you know, I guess, be an intermediary between Bitcoin and regulators and just allow for Bitcoin to develop and be safeguarded by them. You know, putting it back to the Gordian knot, it's all about incentives, right? And political incentives are mostly short-term. And if as a politician you can establish yourself very quickly regulating something on short-term that is a low-hanging fruit, very easy to go after, versus the big guy, right? Bitcoin, I think you'd rather choose that option.
Yeah, definitely. No, and I would argue like it is like with these technical upgrades too, with like bulletproofs and what Grin's doing with Mimblewimble. It's going to be important to see this play out in the wild. See, hey, maybe we implement them in the Bitcoin. Might not be possible for all these all these solutions, but interesting to see like what could be potentially, or what you should strive for. So let's just use this opportunity to drive straight into Grin. So for you, my audience probably doesn't know. I mean, actually, you guys are well educated out there. I'm going to give you freaks some credit. I'm sure a lot of you know what Grin is, but for those who might not know what Grin is, I'll give the high level. It is the first implementation of Mimblewimble, which is a highly private cryptocurrency implementation, correct?
Yep, that's precisely correct.
All right.
So Grin is interesting because, and obviously that's a point of contention amongst proponents of multiple privacy-focused coins. Generally, its objective is to provide a more scalable solution as a privacy coin than existing alternatives, right? I mean, Zcash, you know, is doing well now with having sapling and whatnot, but, you know, a little bit TBD on executional risk and whatnot. Monero just integrated bulletproofs. However, if you project, what would performance be like with significantly more usage, it has different constraints. Grin is effectively a self-truncating blockchain, which means that all the transactions are summed into one and sort of one big block, and that allows for a lot more cutting away of what does not matter in terms of how blocks are constituted, and it calls itself cut through in this case. And it's more so even interesting, besides sort of the technological aspect of it, sort of the ethos, the genesis of Grin, which frankly is as close to Bitcoin as you can get, right? An anonymous entity person, she dropped this white paper. They called themselves Tom Evel's Juidor, or Jesidor, the French name for Tom Riddle from Harry Potter.
Really?
Mimblewimble is actually the tongue-tying spell from Harry Potter, and Grin is short for Gringotts, the wizarding bank of Harry Potter.
This is very interesting. I never knew this.
Everything, sort of if the flippening is Grin surpassing Monero's market cap, maybe then the flappening is Grin surpassing J.K. Rowling's net worth.
That's hilarious. I never knew that.
Yeah. It's all in the spirit of Harry Potter for whatever reason. And then, so Mimblewimble came out by Tom Evel's Jesidor, and that was, I think, on Bitcoin Talk, or I think that forum just dropped it there. All of a sudden, people started implementing a currency called Grin, which is the implementation of the Mimblewimble protocol, led by an anonymous core dev called Igno Peveril. And it's fascinating because there's no pre-sale, no ICO, no pre-mine or anything. It's a purely decentralized, volunteer-driven development effort by people that are just so ideologically driven about creating something, which, frankly is just, if you objectively think about it, very economically irrational in contrast to, sort of what leads people to create ICOs or actual sort of equity-based companies, because these people are not going to get, financial payoff or compensated by it. And for that reason, it already resonates very heavily with a lot of people, because it actually sort of has the core elements of what a true cryptocurrency should aspire to. And then secondly, I think the notion of privacy is something, and you mentioned that earlier, of alkaline pressure. Are these things that Bitcoin should implement or not? A lot of people are of the opinion that just total fungibility, total privacy for Bitcoin is just not achievable, and that's fine, right? It has different ambitions.
Well, somebody say, it's not achievable, and then others would say it's not worthwhile at the protocol level, because then you want to be able to track inflation in some cases with some upgrades.
Yeah, I mean, you can still track it with privacy coins.
Like with bulletproofs in particular, correct? Like there might be a situation
it might be different for bulletproofs. Yeah, I have to look into that. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah,
but so I think the idea, and then also circling back to the valuation framework, I think really sort of fungibility, privacy is something that, at least in its current state, Bitcoin cannot encroach upon from a addressable market perspective, and that privacy coins that have all other sort of serendipitous features into place can really carve out their own percentage of the store value market, and really have a shot at even justifying their own existence and their survival in light of this juggernaut that is Bitcoin.
Yeah, so let's jump into a couple questions about Grin. Number one, no cap, right?
Yes, it's 1 Grin per second.
1 Grin per second, 1 minute blocks, so 60 per block.
Exactly.
There's no plans to cap the supply.
No.
How do you expect this network to accrue value, or this token, excuse me?
Well, empirically, inflation for the first 4 years is similar to Bitcoins or Moneros for the first 4 years, and value clearly accrued. I mean, in that time frame for those networks. I think what's really important mostly is transparency of monetary policy, less so, what is the specification of that monetary policy. What really matters is, do I know how many Bitcoin there will be at X, point in future? Will I know how many Grin there will be on January 31st, 2025. That's what matters. I think then there's sort of arguments you can make both ways about how does that actually influence sort of low-level participants in that network of how they allocate wealth and store wealth in that network.
Yeah, so how, like Bitcoin's marketing, like we were talking earlier, as a deflationary currency where you know that you can store your wealth and not have it your purchasing power eaten away over time. How can we expect this with Grin?
Well, its inflation rate is also relatively deflationary. Even though there's a fixed tail emission for the rest of time, from a percentage perspective, it will decrease and be deflationary.
Are there block rewards or?
There are block rewards and transaction rewards.
I mean, block reward halvings, excuse me.
No, they're not. But what I mean, right, is let's say, if there's 100 Grin today and it's going to be 100 Grin more tomorrow, that's going to be 100% increase versus if there's 1,000,000 Grin and then there's going to be another 100 Grin by tomorrow, right? As a percentage of the total existing Grin, the inflation rate is going to be minuscule.
Yeah. At that point. It's interesting. So what Grin has not officially launched yet, has it? Is it launching?
No, prospectively somewhere around the beginning of next year.
Yeah. And so, all right, I don't know. Where do I want to start? So one, where do you see Grin fitting in? Is it complementary to Bitcoin? Is directly competitive? Do you see it overtaking Bitcoin? And then two, how are you looking to take advantage of this launch if you're so willing to speak about it?
Yeah, sure. I don't think it's going to be a big competitor to Bitcoin, and there's multiple reasons for that, right? Bitcoin has been around for 10 years. Grin even has to launch. Bitcoin has an enormous market cap, developers, network effects, and so forth. It's just, and I know some people that would disagree, like Murad. Shout out to you. It's not fungible, and there's always going to be a market for people that want a decentralized Swiss bank account versus, a very transparent payments network that you can obscure through multiple layer 2 solutions. However, my opinion is that if faced with the decision between something that guarantees privacy versus something that might have good enough privacy, you're probably going to choose the latter. Of course, that's contingent upon other dimensions being satisfied, like is there enough market depth and liquidity? Is it stable enough in value? Is there a great engineering team substantiating the development and what's so forth? But for Grin, it actually checks most of those buckets, right? It has provably great tech. It has ideologically driven people. It has no scammy way of profiting from a pre-mine or pre-sale or ICO, anything that even incurs sort of regulation risk. It has an anonymous founder, which I think is incredibly important for privacy-focused currency, even if that's many years away, where there might be repercussions towards privacy coins. Just eliminating that risk from the start is the greatest thing that you can do, and very much in the spirit of Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yeah.
And then for us, we're seriously considering how can we add to it, how can we help Grin going forward in terms of growing into its value proposition, into its potential, and then how can we support the network from a hash rate perspective from the start? How can we find a way in order to get many people involved as soon as possible from the very outset? How to get Grin into as many hands as possible. One of my partners, Casey, has a great idea of making Grin Sharia compliant. So that might actually be an interesting avenue. But
Bitcoin's
I think yes,
Sharia compliant.
Yeah,
right?
I think it is.
It's halal.
I think it is halal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next step is Grin, making that as well happen. But for us, I think we do want to have exposure as soon as possible. Of course, I can't really talk about the specifications of such, but we think about it as a multifaceted effort to support the network from a actual sort of computing power perspective. How much electricity, how much sort of dollars do we burn in order to support this network? And then additionally, how can we think about creating tech that is for the best of Grin and expanding its addressable market and just, does awesome stuff, right? If that's on a custody side, if that's on a asset exchange side, if that's layer 2 solutions, I think there's a lot of very interesting avenues of how, as an individual entity that is not the central entity, right? That's a significant difference, can really add towards growing something in a very proactive, super additive even manner, right? And we really want to help grow this into its potential and effectively be the dark silver to Bitcoin's gold.
The dark silver. I think that's hilarious. So you guys solely Grin focused? Are you doing any like Bitcoin investments, Bitcoin infrastructure investments, or anything like that? Or
It's outside the scope of the company.
Mhm.
We think of ourselves as taking very concentrated bets. Also thinking about how can we, differentiate ourselves well. I think so. We all personally hold Bitcoin, and maybe as a fund it would make sense, but since we have very focused approaches towards things outside of Bitcoin, where Bitcoin is effectively sort of the watermark of the entire industry, it lies outside of our scope currently.
No, it's interesting. This is obviously a Bitcoin-focused podcast, and I'm what you would consider a maximalist at the end of the day. But it is interesting to see how something similar to Bitcoin might launch, and how people are interested in it. So that's the thing I'm interested in. Are you worried about so there's only so many mental resources that can focus on these technologies. Are you worried about spreading those too thin across too many projects, or?
Yeah, maybe.
So isn't Andrew Palestra?
He's the author of, I think, he was the first guy who reviewed the Mimblewimble white paper when it dropped.
Yeah.
He also actually corrected critical mistakes. So he kind of made it into what it is right now. He's been involved in the sense of things like confidential assets. How would that look like on a Mimblewimble level? Specifically also, I guess, under the purview of liquidity, Blockstream's product. Otherwise, you really see sort of Bitcoin OGs being incredibly excited about Grin. It's really the first currency, the first altcoin that really resonates to people just because of all these features, right? That make it very similar to Bitcoin in nearly all dimensions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because that's it's one of the theories that I strongly believe in, is that I know you don't think Grin's going to flip in Bitcoin, or maybe you do, I don't, but if it were to, does that create a crisis of confidence in the whole concept of a cryptocurrency? Because if Grin can overtake Bitcoin, what's to stop something from overtaking Grin?
Yeah, I was thinking about that a while back in the sense of, it's important for Bitcoin always to be in the front seat, because if it ever does get usurped as an investor, that's a binary event, right? All of a sudden, what you thought was the store of value in the crypto world has been replaced by something else. So what prohibits you then from thinking that the successor is going to be displaced by something else yet again? So effectively, that creates this sort of crescendo of discounts that you have to apply to each of these assets. And frankly, it's kind of like a Russian doll game where all of a sudden you're left with something, that is an asymptote to zero.
Right.
So that actually sort of has this weird game theoretic conclusion, or sort of, effect on the crypto space, where everybody's incentivized to keep Bitcoin at number one, because if that is no longer the case, everything falls apart. Right? Everything is based on Bitcoin being number one. If that's no longer the case, all of a sudden people are left with complete disbelief in anything that should be its successor or does succeed it.
Well, that's where I think it's important to de-alienate between that scenario, which I completely agree. If Bitcoin was producing blocks every 10 minutes and didn't have any major congestion or critical bugs that brought about its demise, but it was just a pure flippening of people picking a next shinier coin over Bitcoin.
Yep.
Those are two different scenarios. Where Bitcoin has a critical bug, which is possible. We found that out 2 months ago.
Yeah.
I don't think that is a death I don't think that would mark a like a death knell in the space as much as a flippening would actually.
Yep.
So there's some nuance to it, in my brain at least.
Yeah, I think it's really important to distinguish between the two.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. No, Grin is Grin. People have been talking about Mimblewimble and Grin, like you said, like the smartest, most pure cypherpunks have been talking about Grin for a while. So I'm excited to see it in the wild, and most particularly, like hopefully, if it is successful, like maybe we'll be able to pull some features into Bitcoin down the road. Who knows?
Yeah, that would be awesome. I mean, originally started out people thinking that it should be just a side chain to Bitcoin.
Yeah, why didn't they do that?
Because frankly, I don't think people get that excited about sidechains. Right?
Yeah, right.
I think creating a currency.
Don't tell Paul that.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I guess I think we talked about it earlier. Like money touches everything around us.
Mm-hmm.
Sidechains are a subset of a cryptocurrency, where cryptocurrency is sort of isomorphic with money. Sidechains are a subset of money, hence people are just going to pay less attention to a sidechain.
Yeah.
A cryptocurrency has all the features that gets a lot more participants involved, right? If that's mining, I mean, if it's proof of work, which is the real deal.
Only thing worthwhile.
If that's custody, if that's developers, if that's owners, if that's consumers and spenders, it just has an orders of magnitude larger opportunity set for people to engage in than anything that is just frankly a subset.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Let's pivot here. I got a tweet up. You tweeted it hours ago, and I found it fascinating. Cryptocurrencies are the first bridge between religion and science.
Yeah.
What the hell are you talking about, man?
Without sounding too laconic, and I think somebody accused me of being a Plato or something like that.
I like that. I would take that as a compliment.
Hopefully, that's nice. I mean, effectively, right? It's this weird combination of qualitative belief in a store of value, which has qualitative factors like immutability, like monetary policy, like the quality of engineers working on it, the brain trust behind Bitcoin, the fact that it has a fair launch versus an ICO, right? Those are sort of, it's like politics. It's sort of like qualitative statements to make for why you think something is superior to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's akin to religion, right? It's a belief system in something that you cannot quantitatively justify. And then cryptocurrencies, that belief is met with a scientific rigor when it comes to the technological implementation, when it comes to transaction throughput, custody, security, cryptography in general. I truly think that money is the intersection of both, and for that reason, cryptocurrency is as well.
Yeah. It's no, that's one thing we like to do here is get cosmic. And that's what I wrote about last week. Like we're talking about the Gordian knot. This is a symbiotic relationship between technology and flesh. And then you can get heady with it. Like Bitcoin, it's helping us discover like some weird things about it. Like help me learn. Like I've said this many times on this podcast, Bitcoin is going to change us more than we change it over time.
Yeah.
Because it changes your time preference. It changes
like
the way you look at the world. And I don't want to get too heady here, but like your thread, like it merges religion and science. Like it is making us think very hard in a scientific endeavor, like the crunching data, like thinking about like what might be best for society. And then at the same time, it only works because of the religious, like you've been describing, inception and immaculate conception that has sort of created this lore and a roar around it, which is
yeah, and you have apostles, right? If that's
raising my hand here,
right? If that's people like Beauty on or even Winston Caceres, who a lot of people in Silicon Valley have to thank for their Bitcoin investment.
I'm not one of the top 12 apostles. I'm probably like one of like the later stragglers, but no, it has evangelist out. That's why this podcast fucking exists. Like,
you have sects,
right? Sects within like Bitcoin Cash. God bless them. They're going through some things right now. They're still around.
Scientology of Bitcoin, huh?
Right? No, it's funny that they think people care about them. I don't want to shit on Bitcoin Cash too much, but 6% of hash power of SHA-256 hash power, like the market has spoken.
I think so too.
Yeah. So we'll see how that drama plays out next week. It'll be fun.
But like the interesting thing is, I really believe that you have a belief system resting on ideological practices that all of a sudden is equally matched with technological implementation of it, which is purely a function of scientific labor, right? Also speaking about proof of work, offline physical commodities meeting an online digital asset. It's a combination of both. And I think that when people project the future, you can look at sort of what the people think where we'll be in 2018, 100 years ago. They were making up crazy things, right? And spaceships and whatnot, entirely novel things. And I think the beauty of like what Bitcoin did was combine well-known things in a novel way. And that's also on a high level what cryptocurrencies do. It combines well-known qualitative principles with scientific implementation and rigor and applications in a way that we've never seen before. And the result of that is that our understanding of money, what it is, what it means, what it will be going forward is completely changed.
Yeah. For those of us who are bought in, especially up to this point, yes, it's definitely changed for me. And just like that's the thing that goes running through my mind, circles day through day through day. Can everybody? That's too pompous of a framing.
Go for it.
Do enough people care? Like, is apathy too much of a thing right now? Like that's what I think Bitcoin's biggest enemy right now is apathy of the masses, where they don't even know they should care.
I think a lot more work has to be done.
Yeah.
I think, people talk about how strong networks effect are. I think they can unravel just as quickly, right? And
interesting. Why?
Well, it has to be well established. I think most of these, if you think about what a network effect is, it's basically just like exponential growth. And if it's not on solid bedrock, then that growth can actually turn into reduction at an equally steep slope.
Mm-hmm.
And I could definitely see a world where if apathy just takes place and no resources are deployed in a way that spreads the word and educates people on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, it can just fizzle out.
Right.
I think we're nowhere near beyond that point in time. I think we're making great strides towards making sure it does at some point, but my opinion is that we're not there yet.
No, I would completely agree. As like I said, it scares the shit out of me. Like apathy could really destroy this real quickly.
Yeah, it's frightening.
Yeah, and other than my friend who we read her text earlier, but a lot of the people I talk to don't give a shit. They're like, I don't care. Still laugh. Some are turning, but it is like that's what I wonder. Like, does there need to be a cataclysmic event in the traditional markets that sort of draws people to have an awakening and an aha moment to not be apathetic?
I don't
anymore.
even think so, right? We mentioned the idea that all of a sudden Bitcoin has been, as a meme, as an entity, as a thing, established in the world. And it's become very convenient for people to justify holding Bitcoin or speaking about it, right? A couple of years ago, it was like everybody was sneaky sneaks about it, more or less, in the public, right?
Sneaky sneaks. I like that. It's a nice little German translation there. Sneaky sneaks. I like that.
People didn't really talk about Bitcoin with their families as much. It wasn't a thing. It was still this weird sort of drug dealer, criminal currency. Now people can openly talk about it in public. it's very easy for them to transition to it as just a topic of conversation. And I don't think that people need a cathartic, like, I don't think the late adopters, what, I guess from a statistical perspective will be the majority of people, will need a cathartic experience in order to start embracing and purchasing and owning Bitcoin or using it as a money. I think actually the opposite, which is we have to make it as convenient and frictionless as possible for them to actually make that step, because they're lazy as fuck, quite frankly.
Right.
People are super lazy, and talking about apathy, like, sort of path of least resistance, you're always rather going to go with what's the easier path than what's the harder path. And the hard path right now is buying and owning and using
Securing
Bitcoin.
And yeah.
Right. And we want to make it as convenient as possible so they don't even have to think about it. You basically want brainless people to do a brainless thing, which is own Bitcoin and use it as a money. And at some point, likely that will be the case. But we do have a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah. And that's why I'm excited to see Lightning a year in, apps being built, people experimenting at hack days being blown up around the world, with people excited to build, making it Lightning Network having made it easy to build. But yeah, I do think we are far away from having Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency, at a point where people don't even realize they're using it. Maybe the Cash App has opened my eyes a little bit. It's like using their Bitcoin buying functionalities and how their Boost program works. Like I can see them working it in some way where people don't even realize they're using it, but they're benefiting at the app level. But then obviously key custody and having true custody of your Bitcoin and making that UX impeccable is the holy grail.
Yeah, I think, and maybe I'm biased because of sort of having a more finance background, working in hedge funds and sort of like capital allocators. That's why I like Fidelity, etc., going into the space and building out great products, because I want to see 401ks go into Bitcoin. I want to see people embracing Bitcoin as something that you obviously have in your portfolio, right? People thought that a 60-40 stock bond allocation is just the norm. That's the way things are. I want to see that, integrate, I don't know if that's 50-40, 10% Bitcoin. I want to see that happen going forward. And I think once you just have things like this occur in daily lives and people just start taking that for granted, and I think people assimilate pretty quickly to these types of things, especially in a world with increasing velocity of information exchange through technology, right? Through social networks, through mobile phones, through the internet. I also think that things can establish themselves at a significantly faster pace than they did 10, 20 years ago. So that end game is up for grabs for Bitcoin, right? It's for it in order to establish itself in such a sufficient way that people don't have to think twice about owning it and integrating it into its wealth management.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing this up, because this is what I wrote about today, too, is describe Bitcoin as the currency for the common man. This has been something we've been building on the last 3 podcasts here, me and several guests. So Bitcoin as the currency for the common man. To make it simple, you're basically delineating between a deflationary and inflationary monetary system, where in the inflationary system, to save your purchasing power throughout time, what you need to do is go invest in stocks, bonds, mutual funds. You can't just park your money in a savings account, or inflation will eat away at that purchasing power. And to keep up with that purchasing power, hopefully increase it over time as you prepare for retirement, whatever it may be, you have to go invest in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, whatever it may be. That takes extra research, extra money, paying an advisor, whatever it may be, and it's a heavy lift, especially for the common man who's typically got a pretty grueling 9-to-5 family to raise, and little disposable income outside of what he's willing to save. So, if Bitcoin were to take over, maybe these portfolio decisions would be a little easier if you know that you're investing in a deflationary currency, where your stake of the total pie is pretty constant. You can prove via code, that fact alone, where you can store your purchasing power throughout time. And I'm using purchasing power particularly here because a lot of people get confused with like price value and purchasing power. That creates a base from which people who have to go preserve their wealth via investing these days, this makes it easier for them to climb the economic ladder because they have to think less, and they can just have certainty knowing that if they are good savers and frugal enough, they will save their value over time, and they don't have to go into all that overinvestment shit.
Yeah, I think you're addressing the core forcing function that drives people into multi-asset allocations, right? Which is just to keep pace with reduction in purchasing power.
Right.
And if you remove that core cause, right, that ultimate reason for why you're making these decisions, everything changes. And none of that is necessary anymore. And I can't even fathom what the repercussions of that would be.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what is like starting to dawn on me this week. Like this week in particular, first 2 days of the event and the conversations that I had last week on the podcast, like it's really been like, holy shit, like it may be this simple of a framing to have people come to an aha moment a lot quicker. And that's like what I'm becoming more convinced of by the hour and by the second now after that reaction from you is like, this may be the best framing. Like, hey, right now, Joe Schmo down the street, if you want to save your money, your purchasing power over time, you cannot put your money in your savings account. You have to go be active in the markets. You have to do research. You have to figure out, learn how to do a DCF flow or a dollar.
Yeah. Discounted cash flow.
Discounted cash flow, excuse me. And learn about EBITDA multiples and like what's fucking palatable as an investment, and then actually sign up on a brokerage account and make individual stock or mutual fund or ETF investments. Yeah. Imagine not having to do that.
And interestingly, right, that's whole like Vanguard's business, right, is effectively saying, or mutual like ETFs, index funds, etc. Their whole business is, look, you're not going to make any alpha picking stocks yourself. Why don't you just use us to invest in a basket of stocks? But even that can be reduced to an even simpler proposition, which is you're going to invest in Bitcoin, and all of the above doesn't even matter anymore because you're only investing with Vanguard, not only because, okay, maybe you're not a good stock allocator, but frankly, all you want to do is just not lose the value of wealth, right? You maybe even want to increase it, right? But Bitcoin abstracts away even that reason for using a Vanguard, which is your purchasing power will not be debased over time because of its nature. And that is just, I guess, diametrically opposite to any of those, I guess, archaic business models.
Right. And I want to make it clear that I'm not negging on investment practices. I think people should be able to invest and should invest in these products if they have to be. But we have to de-alienate between investing and saving here, where right now people have to invest because they are unable to save their purchasing power throughout time. Bitcoin world would change that, where you would not have to invest to maintain purchasing power.
Exactly.
You could invest for added benefit to your portfolio.
Yeah. And, frankly, if it's outside your circle of competence, you don't have to make the decision towards trying to keep pace with your lack of purchasing power or even trying to make money. You're rather going to likely lose money, right? So you completely get rid of that problem altogether. It's no longer a fact of life. It's actually an artificial problem imposed by the way things just kind of turn out to be, right? The alien conclusion of centuries of economic development completely eradicated by a novel technology.
And it was just fucking dropped on a forum out of nowhere on Halloween 10 years ago. It's crazy.
Yeah.
We're here fucking on a podcast talking about it. Like, how crazy is it that, like, it has driven us humans this crazy?
Unbelievable.
Right? That's like, and we're getting drunk. I'm drunk at least. I've been chugging way faster than you have.
Gotta keep up here.
No, you do not. Do not. I gotta slow down. But it's like, holy shit. Like, what if maybe it could be an alien technology where, like, the aliens are just looking down on us, or like, hey, these idiots just need this one thing to coordinate. And
how are they this slow?
Right?
Why aren't they way more ahead of where they are currently?
It's figured out how to make a email address and get into the cypherpunk mailing list and just dropped it on us. It's a fantasy I like to appease every once in a while. Probably not highly unlikely.
Or maybe Bitcoin is just the ultimate artificial intelligence. That's
right.
Maybe the other interpretation you could take.
Did you see we were pretty Harvard basically confirmed that we found aliens?
I did not see that. No.
Yeah. There's an object floating through our solar system around Saturn, I believe in particular. And a team of Harvard researchers are pretty certain that is an extraterrestrial vehicle.
That's fascinating.
So aliens are here. I'm a big alien guy. Big fan of
then
aliens.
it's only one step away from believing that they incepted Bitcoin. Huh?
Right? Where are we here? We're only 120 in. What else do you want to get on? What interests you outside of Bitcoin? What'd you do growing up?
What did I do growing up? So I grew up in
You're
in
tall.
Munich.
You're a lot
I'm
taller
tall.
than I was expecting. Did you row?
I was actually a walk-on at Stanford. I didn't enjoy it very much.
For crew?
For crew, yeah.
I knew you did crew just somehow. You have the fucking perfect like crew body.
That's funny, yeah. I guess tall enough, and if you have.
Sorry, I'm fawning over you. Right
no, if you have, I guess if you're somewhat athletic, they kind of like trying to recruit you.
Yeah.
I think, I never really did crew before Stanford, and then I didn't enjoy it as much, but I did have a lot of important takeaways. And quite frankly, one of the most important being, and that has been a life lesson, is that you can't just, as in any other sport, sub yourself out. Mm-hmm. Once you're on the water, once you're, in the boat with your colleagues, with your teammates, you can't just throw, you can't just say, screw this, I'm not going to row anymore. I'm just going to throw my paddle in the water. Mm-hmm. Because that fucks up everything for everybody else. Yeah. Right? It literally halts the boat. If you play soccer or football or basketball, you can sub yourself out. Right? You can just pretend to be hurt. You can say, Coach, I don't want to play any longer. With rowing, you have to pull through to the last second and give it everything you got, because there's just extremely concave payoff, sort of repercussions, which is, or it might even be binary, which is you stop, everybody else has to stop. Mm-hmm. Any other sport, you leaving, you stopping your input will not as so much influence the outcome of anybody else. Yeah. And, even though my time on this team was short because, frankly, I didn't get recruited, that wasn't like the main reason I came to Stanford. I had other interests. That really sort of imprinted itself on me and sort of how I think about teams, how I think about organizations, and how you really work together in a super additive manner, which is everybody has to pull through, because the repercussions of a single party not doing so can even cause a binary event, which is sort of termination of everybody else's outcome.
Yeah, affect the whole. I was a lacrosse player, and our big, our coach's biggest theme was you're only as strong as your weakest link. So everybody from the best D1 recruit to the last man on the bench had to have their job down pat, whether it be a practice player.
That's critical.
Putting the water in, whatever it may be. You're as strong as your weakest link. Everybody has to be on the same page, and it builds self-accountability, which I think is huge.
Absolutely.
And maybe lacking in this world to a certain extent.
I think even, sort of like a softer form is just, I do believe that physical exercise, or at least the attempt to be healthy, eat clean, exercise or do sports, at least whatever is sort of the realm of your possibilities, is not only important, but it's a signal, right? It's a signal to everybody else that you take yourself seriously, because the health repercussions are very obvious and, are detrimental. And if you don't take your body seriously, your mind will suffer, right? They're intrinsically.
This is so true. One thing I've been doing more recently, I've been a big bike guy recently. You freaks know that. But hopping on the bike, I've been doing like 20-mile bike rides in an hour. And
that's impressive.
You do it. You put like a YouTube video on. You find like an hour podcast.
Yeah.
Like over the weekend, I listened to Stefan Livera's second shout out to this podcast with Samurai Wallet. One of the heads of the Samurai Wallet, not the dev, but the business guy and the idea guy. But I feel like when you're exercising and listening too, like you're a little bit more intent and you're trying to distract yourself from like the pain of exercising. So you're listening a little bit better and a little bit more focused. And then after that, like that's actually one of my favorite times to like get work done is like the luxury of working from home and having a gym in the apartment building, able to work and then get up. And that's when I get most of my work done is like the hour, 2 hours right after my workout. Yeah.
I'm significantly more happy and productive if I do physical exercise, 100%.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, like, you know, music has always been a big element of my life. I played a lot of piano. I DJ'd at Stanford, which was a good time. I tried to bring the European German house and techno to the West Coast.
What was that like?
At least a lot of friction, and I feel like people got used to it. I just kind of like did my thing, and then eventually people got it, you know. And at some point, like, you know, I think there was an audience at the end.
Was there booth thotties by the end?
No comment.
I'll take that as a maybe.
No, but you know, I think it's important to have different interests.
Right.
You know, quite frankly, I think lately, my life has been very much revolving around work. I think it's, you know, people say life is a marathon, not a sprint. I think sometimes you have to sprint in order to be able to run a marathon.
Mm-hmm. That actually reminds me of another one of my favorite quotes from lacrosse. Like, to get fast, you have to run fast.
Yeah.
To get fast, you have to run fast. That's like sounds like, what the hell do you mean? But it's simple but profound. Like, you literally have to try to run fast to get fast.
Like, people think, oh, this is like tautological, like this is like super obvious, but you know, frankly, the older I'm getting, like the more aphorisms grow on me, and like the more all of these sort of statements hold a lot of value, and you just have to put into work to really sort of get to where you want to be. And you know, like, I guess over time you sort of converge upon what your main passions and interests are. Currently, it's just full on work mode. This is all I think about. This is what I dream about. This is what I want to achieve. This is what I want the team I work with to achieve going forward, and build something that can really grow into its potential. And there's a beauty in that, right? Because it's purely super additive. Like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's incredible if you have the opportunity to actually see different elements of what constitute a company come together, and then all of a sudden it actually is, right? It's existing, and there's value, and people endowed with value.
There's no better feeling than being on a successful team or part of a successful company that just crushes it. Like, and you realize in retrospect that it would not have worked out that way unless everybody was fully bought in and holding themselves accountable.
It's incredibly gratifying.
Right. And then once you find a group that like you just are on the same wavelength and you're like fully aligned, you don't even have to say it. You just know it.
Yeah.
There's no feeling like it. And it's rare. It's rare. It
speaks for, you know, humans just being social animals. Like, if you're on the same wavelength with anybody, nothing else compares, because things just click and things are seamless and frictionless, and they just go the way they're supposed to. And you're in the flow, and good things come from the flow.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to end. Good things come from the flow.
Yeah.
Big fan of the flow. Alex, it's been a pleasure, man.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you for coming by.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. You have a parting note for the freaks?
Buy Bitcoin.
It's a good one. That's a good one. That's all we have this week, freaks. Peace and love.
Thank you very much.